What if the secret to building a global empire, to securing a dynasty that would last for 300 years wasn't found in the might of conquering armies or the brilliance of military strategy, but in the deliberate breaking of one of humanity's most fundamental and ancient taboos? What if the key to ultimate, unquestionable power was marrying your own sister? This isn't some twisted, imagined fantasy. This was the shocking reality for the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. For 3 centuries, this single Greek family ruled as divine pharaohs, creating a world of almost unimaginable wealth and intellectual splendor, with the city of Alexandria as its glittering, cosmopolitan heart. It was a place of genius, home to the great library and the lighthouse, one of the wonders of the ancient world. But beneath this shimmering surface of their golden age, the Ptolemies nurtured a dark and dangerous tradition. It was a tradition of brother-sister marriage, a practice they believed would preserve the purity of their divine blood and lock down their absolute power for eternity. But this tradition, intended to create unbreakable stability, did the exact opposite. Instead, it unleashed a horrifying and inescapable cycle of paranoia, betrayal, and what can only be described as madness. It twisted the sacred bonds of family into razor-sharp political weapons and turned the opulent royal palace into a viper's nest, where sibling rivalry wasn't just about childhood arguments or petty jealousies, but about cold-blooded assassination. This is the story of the Ptolemies, a dynasty that became defined by incest, and the cascading personal tragedies that shaped Egypt's most scandalous, and ultimately, its most profoundly dysfunctional, royal family. To truly understand the depths of their depravity, the sickness that festered at the core of this family, you only need to hear one story, one of the single most monstrous acts a king has ever committed against his own blood. Imagine a queen, Cleopatra II, holding a lavish banquet to celebrate her birthday. She is embroiled in a bitter civil war with her husband, who also happens to be her brother, Ptolemy VIII. Their brutal conflict has torn the kingdom in two. But on this day, a special gift arrives from him, a large, heavy box. Inside, she doesn't find priceless jewels or a long-awaited peace offering. Ancient historians tell us, in horrified tones, that she found the dismembered body of their own son. Ptolemy had his and Cleopatra's child, a boy of about 12, murdered, cut into pieces, and grotesquely packaged to be sent to his mother as a birthday present. This wasn't some isolated, shocking act of madness. This was the Ptolemaic way. Our story begins not with incest, but with chaos and ambition, in the immediate aftermath of the death of the ancient world's greatest conqueror. When Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BC, he left behind a massive, sprawling empire with no clear heir. His ruthless Macedonian generals, known to history as the Diadochi, or the successors, immediately began tearing his legacy apart, carving out vast kingdoms for themselves from the spoils. One of the shrewdest and most calculating of these generals was a man named Ptolemy, son of Lagus. While others waged bloody wars over the traditional heartlands of Macedonia and Persia, Ptolemy set his sights on the richest prize of all, Egypt. He didn't just conquer Egypt with force, he secured it with an act of audacious theft, stealing the ultimate symbol of political and religious legitimacy. Ptolemy orchestrated what can only be described as a grand hijacking of Alexander the Great's funeral procession. The conqueror's body, exquisitely embalmed and placed in a golden sarcophagus, was meant to be returned to Macedonia for burial. But as the cortege made its way through Syria, Ptolemy intercepted it with an army and diverted it to Egypt. He brought the deified king's body to be buried in a magnificent tomb in Alexandria, the new capital he was building. It was a masterstroke of propaganda. By possessing Alexander's sacred remains, Ptolemy I Soter, a title meaning, the savior, positioned himself as the conqueror's true and chosen successor. He and his descendants would now rule Egypt not as foreign Greek occupiers, but as legitimate pharaohs, adopting the divine traditions and rituals of the thousands of years of rulers who came before them. The Ptolemaic kingdom was born, a thoroughly Greek dynasty navigating an ancient Egyptian world. For the first generation, things were relatively conventional. Ptolemy I ruled firmly and wisely, establishing Alexandria as a global beacon of learning and culture. His son, Ptolemy II, inherited a stable and powerful kingdom. And it was he who took the fateful, unprecedented step that would define the dynasty forever. Ptolemy II was already married to a woman named Arsinoe I, but his political and personal ambition turned toward his own full-blooded sister, Arsinoe II. She was a force of nature, brilliant, ruthless, and a master of political maneuvering. Her life had already been a whirlwind of power and bloodshed. Married off as a teenager to the aging king Lysimachus of Thrace, she bore him 3 sons. But desperate to secure the throne for her own children, she was accused of plotting against her husband's eldest son and heir, leading to his execution. After Lysimachus was killed in battle, she made a disastrous second marriage to her own paternal half-brother, Ptolemy Keranos. He proved to be a paranoid tyrant who, fearing she was conspiring against him, murdered 2 of her young sons right in front of her. A refugee queen with a tragic and blood-soaked past, Arsinoe II fled to the one place she knew she could still wield influence, her brother's prosperous court in Egypt. Soon after her arrival, Ptolemy II's first wife was conveniently accused of plotting to assassinate the king and was swiftly exiled, a conspiracy many historians believe Arsinoe II orchestrated herself. With the queen now out of the picture, Ptolemy II did something that was utterly unthinkable by Greek standards: he married his own sister, Arsinoe II. To the wider Greek world, this was a shocking scandal, an abhorrent violation of custom. But in the political landscape of Egypt, it was a stroke of genius. For centuries, Egyptian pharaohs had a history of marrying their sisters, a practice believed to preserve the purity of their divine bloodline. By marrying Arsinoe II, Ptolemy II wasn't just breaking a taboo, he was sending a powerful, unambiguous message. He was declaring that his family members were not merely Greek kings ruling over Egypt, but true Egyptian pharaohs, divine beings set apart from and above mortal men. Their union, born from ruthless plotting, was a resounding political success, though it remained childless. Arsinoe II was elevated to the status of a full co-ruler, her face appearing on coins alongside her brothers, and she became a major force in shaping state policy. She set the precedent for the powerful, influential, and often dangerous Ptolemaic queens who would follow. But she also cemented a dark and destructive legacy. This first full sibling marriage, presented as a solution to keep the bloodline pure and power concentrated, had introduced a fatal poison into the family tree. It was a solution that would ultimately create far more devastating problems than it ever solved. The precedent set by Ptolemy II and Arsinoe II did not usher in an era of peace and stability. Instead, it lit a slow-burning fuse that would eventually consume the entire dynasty. The next ruler, Ptolemy III, actually broke the emerging pattern. He married a princess from Cyrene who was a distant cousin, not a sister, and enjoyed a fairly successful and prosperous reign. But the ideological seed of sibling rivalry and the consolidation of power through familial marriage had been firmly planted, and with the accession of the fourth king, that seed sprouted into a garden of horrors. Ptolemy IV Philopator, whose name ironically means father-lover, took the throne in 221 BC. Ancient sources paint him as a weak and dissolute ruler, far more interested in lavish, drunken parties and literary pursuits than in the difficult business of running a kingdom. His reign began with a chilling and systematic purge of his own family, likely orchestrated by his corrupt and powerful ministers, Sosibius and Agathocles. To secure his throne from any potential rivals, Ptolemy IV had his own mother, the formidable Berenice II, murdered. He didn't stop there. His younger brother Megas, who was popular with the army, was also eliminated, reputedly scalded to death in his bath. His uncle was killed as well. For the Ptolemies, power was rapidly becoming a zero-sum game. Any relative, no matter how close, was a potential rival for the throne, and murder was proving to be the easiest and most effective method of negotiation. To complete this grim picture, Ptolemy IV married his full sister, Arsinoe III. Theirs was the first full sibling marriage in the dynasty to produce a male heir, the future Ptolemy V, a fact that should have secured Arsinoe's position. But in the venomous atmosphere of the Ptolemaic court, giving the king an heir didn't make a queen safe, it often made her a primary target. Once her biological duty was done, Arsinoe III was no longer a political necessity, but a significant threat. She could act as regent for her young son and potentially seize power for herself. For the corrupt courtiers like Sosibius and Agathocles, who effectively controlled her weak-willed husband, this was a risk they were unwilling to take. Shortly after Ptolemy IV drank himself to an early grave, his top ministers had Arsinoe III murdered in a palace coup. They wanted to rule as regents for the 5-year-old king and could not have a powerful, ambitious mother standing in their way. The deadly cycle was now firmly set. A new king takes power, murders his inconvenient relatives, marries his sister, and that sister wife often becomes the next target for elimination. The family was literally eating itself alive. The people of Alexandria, who had admired their queen, were so horrified by her murder that a furious mob hunted down the minister Agathocles and tore him and his entire family to pieces in the streets. But this brutal act of mob justice couldn't fix the deep-seated rot within the dynasty. The violence had become systemic. Each new generation inherited not just a throne, but a simmering blood feud against their own kin. If the Ptolemaic dynasty was rotting from the inside, then Ptolemy VIII was the most grotesque and undeniable symptom of the disease. History remembers him by his mocking nickname, Physcon, meaning potbelly, for his morbid obesity, but his physical appearance was nothing compared to the profound ugliness of his soul. He was, without a doubt, the cruelest, most sadistic, and most monstrous of all the Ptolemies. His path to power was a tangled, bloody mess typical of his family. He initially ruled in a tense, dysfunctional trio with his older brother, Ptolemy VI, and his sister, Cleopatra II, who were married to each other. Their mutual hatred and constant scheming soon plunged Egypt into a protracted civil war. After his brother died from wounds sustained in battle, the throne and the hand of the widowed Queen Cleopatra II were offered to Physcon to reunify the kingdom. He was now king, married to his sister, who was also the widow of his dead brother. It was a recipe for disaster. According to some historical sources, the wedding day itself was marked by a horrifying slaughter. To eliminate any possible rival, Physcon allegedly had his young nephew, his new wife's son from her first marriage, murdered in his own mother's arms during the wedding feast. It was a brutal and unambiguous message to the court and to his wife. He, and he alone, was now the undisputed master of Egypt. But Physcon's depravity had only just begun. Married to his sister, Cleopatra II, he soon grew bored and his eyes fell upon a younger woman, his own niece, also named Cleopatra, the daughter of his wife and his dead brother. In a stunning and scandalous move, Physcon married this young Cleopatra III without ever divorcing her mother. He created a toxic royal triumvirate, one king, married to both a mother and her daughter, who were simultaneously his sister and his niece. The two Cleopatras became bitter, irreconcilable rivals, and their feud once again tore the kingdom apart. Eventually, Cleopatra II, the elder sister wife, rallied the people of Alexandria, who loathed the bloated and tyrannical king, and successfully drove him into exile. From his refuge on the island of Cyprus, Physcon plotted his revenge, and it was here that he committed the act that would make him infamous throughout the ancient world. Cleopatra II's son, Ptolemy Memphites, who was also Physcon's own child, was with his father in exile. Hearing that Cleopatra planned to defy him by making the boy the new king, Physcon decided to remove this political threat in the most sadistic way imaginable. He had his own son murdered. But a simple death was not enough to satisfy his rage. He ordered the boy's body to be systematically dismembered. The head, hands, and feet were then carefully packed into a chest and sent to Alexandria, timed to arrive on the very day of Queen Cleopatra II's birthday celebration. As she held a grand banquet, the box was presented to her as a gift from her exiled husband. She opened it to find the butchered remains of her own child. It is an act of such profound and calculated cruelty that it almost defies belief, the ultimate and most sickening expression of the Ptolemaic sickness, a world where family ties meant absolutely nothing in the face of political ambition. Physcon eventually reclaimed his throne, and a deeply uneasy truce was declared between him and his two Cleopatra wives, forcing the three to rule together. But the damage was irreparable. He had murdered his nephew and his own son. He was a human monster who wore a crown, and his legacy was a dynasty now so thoroughly broken that it would never recover. After the unparalleled horrors of Physcon's reign, the dynasty staggered into its final, agonizing century. The foundation was irrevocably cracked, the family was a ruin of paranoia and hatred, and the shadow of a rising Rome loomed larger with every passing year. The incestuous marriages continued, but they were now just one component in a relentless machine of conspiracy and murder that was grinding the once great kingdom into dust. Physcon's death left the kingdom to his two rival wives, Cleopatra II and Cleopatra III, and his two sons. It was a situation perfectly designed for chaos. The formidable Cleopatra III seized control, choosing to rule with her elder, more experienced son, Ptolemy IX. But she was a paranoid ruler who could not tolerate him having any real power or influence independent of her. Ptolemy IX was married to his sister, Cleopatra IV, and by all accounts, he genuinely loved her. But his mother, Cleopatra III, saw their close bond as a direct threat to her own authority. In a cold-hearted power play, she forced her son to divorce his beloved wife's sister and marry another, younger sister, Cleopatra Selene, who she believed would be easier to manipulate. Cleopatra III's paranoia only continued to grow. She eventually manufactured claims that Ptolemy IX was trying to have her assassinated and used this pretext to incite the volatile Alexandrian mob against him, driving him into exile. In his place, she installed her younger, more pliable son, Ptolemy X, on the throne beside her. She thought she had finally found the perfect puppet. She was tragically wrong. After years of being his mother's pawn, Ptolemy X grew tired of her suffocating control. In 101 BC, he had his own mother, Cleopatra III, murdered, finally freeing himself from her influence. The woman who had ruthlessly pitted her sons against each other for decades was finally undone by the very monster she had created. The years that followed were a bewildering blur of chaos. The exiled Ptolemy IX and the ruling Ptolemy X waged war on each other. Brother turned against brother, son had murdered mother, husband had murdered wife. The state religion and the economy were in shambles. The very reliance on sibling marriage that was meant to keep the dynasty strong and unified had instead turned the family inward on itself, creating a closed, pressurized system of escalating violence and mistrust. Across the Mediterranean, Rome watched and waited, as its once great rival rotted from the inside out, becoming ever more ripe for the taking. Into this maelstrom of terminal decay, the final product of 3 centuries of incest, ambition, and murder was born. She is the one Ptolemy everyone remembers, Cleopatra VII. She was not an exception to the brutal family rulebook, she was its ultimate culminati. She was intelligent, multilingual, charismatic, and utterly ruthless, a true Ptolemy, armed with all the cunning and cynical resolve her toxic heritage had given her. Like so many of her ancestors, her reign began with a mandated sibling marriage. After her father's death, the teenage Cleopatra became co-ruler with her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, whom she was required to marry by their father's will. The arrangement was doomed from the start. A power struggle, stoked by courtiers and advisors, erupted almost immediately, and Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria into exile. This was a familiar Ptolemaic story, but Cleopatra brought a new and powerful weapon to the fight, Rome. She famously and daringly aligned herself with the visiting Roman general, Julius Caesar, smuggling herself into the palace wrapped in a carpet or bedding sack to gain a secret audience with him. It was a bold, theatrical move, and it worked spectacularly. With Caesar's powerful legions at her back, Cleopatra went to war against her own brother and husband. The conflict, known as the Siege of Alexandria, ended when Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while trying to escape the battlefield. Cleopatra was back on the throne, but Ptolemaic tradition, and Roman sensibilities, demanded she have a male co-ruler. So, she was promptly married to her next youngest brother, Ptolemy XIV. Her true partner, however, was Caesar, with whom she toured the Nile and bore a son, Caesar Ion. Her new brother-husband was now not just irrelevant, but a political liability. Shortly after Caesar's assassination in Rome, as Cleopatra scrambled to secure her power base, the young Ptolemy XIV died suddenly. Ancient sources are highly suspicious, suggesting Cleopatra likely had him poisoned to clear the way for her infant son, Caesar Ion, to be installed as her co-regent, a partner who posed no threat to her absolute authority. There was still one more sibling to deal with, her younger sister, Arsinoe IV. Arsinoe had been a rival during the war, proclaimed queen by the Alexandrian army, and was now living in supervised exile at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. Cleopatra, a true product of her dynasty, could not tolerate any potential threat, no matter how distant. In 41 BC, at Cleopatra's direct request, her new Roman ally and lover, Mark Antony, dispatched assassins who carried out the execution of Arsinoe, allegedly on the very steps of the temple. It was a sacrilegious act that scandalized even the Romans. The last great Ptolemy had now completed the grim family checklist. She had married two of her brothers, likely had both of them killed, and had her own sister assassinated. This wasn't just a ruthless quest for political power, it was the ingrained, survivalist instinct of a dynasty taught for 10 generations that the greatest and most immediate danger always comes from within your own family. For 300 years, the Ptolemies had spilled oceans of blood in their relentless pursuit of power. But the political chaos and moral degradation were only half of the story. The very tradition they believed would preserve their divine status, the generational, systematic inbreeding, was likely taking a terrible physical toll as well. While we do not have their DNA to conduct definitive tests, clues from ancient descriptions, sculptures, and coin portraits paint a disturbing and consistent picture. It's important to state that we lack direct skeletal proof of widespread genetic disorders, but the circumstantial evidence from multiple sources is compelling. Let's look at the clues passed down through the generations. We've already met Ptolemy VIII, Physcon, or Potbelly. Coin portraits and horrified descriptions from ancient writers confirm him as being morbidly obese. This wasn't unique to him, a tendency toward obesity seems to run through the later generations of the dynasty. Many Ptolemaic rulers, both male and female, are also depicted with a distinctive sharp, hooked nose and, perhaps most unnervingly, bulging, prominent eyes. This condition, known medically as exophthalmos, is often a symptom of thyroid disease, which can itself be a heritable condition. Some historians and medical experts speculate that these recurring physical traits point to a cascade of inherited genetic disorders. The psychological toll is harder to measure but impossible to ignore. Was their extreme, almost pathological paranoia and breathtaking cruelty purely a psychological result of growing up in a murderous, high-stakes family environment, or was it amplified and exacerbated by a genetic predisposition to mental instability caused by centuries of inbreeding? It was likely a horrific feedback loop. The incestuous marriages directly fueled the political paranoia, which in turn led to assassinations and civil wars. At the same time, those same unions may have been subtly degrading their physical and mental health, making them even more prone to the erratic, impulsive, and violent behavior that came to define their dynasty. Their obsessive quest for divine purity had, in a tragic irony, created a bloodline that was politically, morally, and perhaps even biologically, cursed. This incredible, unbelievable cycle of power, betrayal, and madness fundamentally shaped the ancient world and led directly to the rise of the Roman Empire in the East. The story of the Ptolemies is a dark and powerful reminder that history is often driven not by grand ideologies, but by the most twisted and intimate of human dramas. If you love digging into the scandals, secrets, and shocking stories that the history textbooks often leave out, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss our next journey into the darkest and most fascinating corners of the past. The final fall of the Ptolemaic dynasty was, perhaps, inevitable from the moment it began. After her decisive defeat at the naval battle of Actium and the subsequent suicide of Mark Antony, Cleopatra VII chose her own end, famously, according to legend, with the bite of an asp. Her death in 30 BC was not just the end of a life, it was the end of a 300-year-old dynasty and the end of the last independent Hellenistic kingdom. Her son Caesar Ion, the last male Ptolemy and the physical embodiment of her alliance with Julius Caesar, was hunted down and swiftly executed by the future Emperor Augustus, who coldly and pragmatically remarked that, 2 Caesars are one too many. The story of the Ptolemies stands as the ultimate historical irony. They embraced the tradition of sibling marriage to solve a critical problem: how to maintain a pure, divine, and unassailably powerful bloodline, separate from their Egyptian subjects and Greek rivals. They tried to make themselves living gods on earth. But that very solution, their most defining policy, became their undoing. The tradition that was meant to consolidate power instead turned their family into a self-consuming engine of destruction. It bred a paranoia so intense and pervasive that mothers turned on sons, brothers murdered brothers, and sisters had sisters killed. It created a toxic, unstable political environment that left them weak and vulnerable to the patient, calculating power of Rome. And it may even have poisoned them from within, corrupting the very blood they sought to keep pure. They built one of the most magnificent and intellectually vibrant empires of the ancient world, but they built it on a foundation of moral and genetic rot. Their legacy is a chilling testament to the fact that no dynasty, no matter how powerful or wealthy, can possibly survive when it declares war on itself.